Welcome to This Dementia Life, created by Dementia Action Alliance. Our website is daanow.org. I'm proud to be your host, Chuck McClatchy, and I live my dementia life with Alzheimer's disease. During this Dementia Life podcast, we'll have conversations with inspiring people living with dementia and the amazing people that care about us. I am so happy today that my guest is Jennifer Carson, who is a PhD. She's also Director of Dementia Engagements, Education and Research Programs, School of Community Health Services, University of Reno, and she's Director of Dementia Friendly Nevada. Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Well, thank you for having me on, Chuck. This is awesome. I'm excited for the opportunity to visit with you, because visiting with you is always awesome. But excited to connect with the folks who tune in as well. I guess just by way of introduction, I've been working to support elders for a little over 30 years now. Actually in a professional role, even earlier than that as a volunteer. When I was a kid, my mom was a nurse in a nursing home in Arizona, and I became a volunteer on weekends for something fun to do. And I used to go to work with my mom. I'd bring my guitar and I'd play songs while my mom worked. And I didn't know that many songs, but the residents at that community were very appreciative. And I made a lot of friends. And I think my favorite part about volunteering in a nursing home was just hearing all of these amazing stories from the residents that I got to support. And I really, I loved their stories, and I loved their friendship. And so as soon as I was old enough to work, I got my first job in a nursing home. I was a dining room assistant. I was 15. And by the time I was 16 years old, this is back in the 80s, I worked as a nursing assistant. I was only 16, so it was back in the day before you needed to be 18 or be certified. And so I worked as a nursing assistant, and then by 19 years of age, they moved me into activities. They said, Jennifer, you're really great with the residents. The residents love you, but you're just kind of slow at your job. And because I had so much fun hanging out with the elders, I took my time and focused on the person, not on the task. And so they felt that that my approach would be better utilized in the activities department, and that was fine. So I started working for activities and learned that I could have a career in therapeutic recreation. So I went to school and got my undergrad in therapeutic recreation, and so worked in long-term care for several years, even prior to graduating with my undergrad. And after I graduated, it was kind of an interesting time in the field. I had the opportunity to open the first standalone memory care community in the state of Washington. I was the program director. And that was really, even though I had worked with elders who were living with dementia for many years before it, that was the first time that I really started thinking about approaches that were specific to elders who are living with dementia. So I spent a lot of my career focusing specifically on the care and support of people who are living with dementia, and focused a lot of my scholarship on that in graduate school. But interestingly, what I've learned is that what's good for supporting people who are living with dementia is ultimately just what's good for supporting everybody. And so people living with dementia who I've had the opportunity to support over the years as my friends and my partners in care, they've taught me a lot over the years about how to provide care and support to anybody. So yeah, it's been a long career, Chuck. It's 30 some odd years later. I'm still supporting older adults, and I love it, love it, love it. Can't imagine doing anything different.
Well, I know since what I've met you about a little over a year ago, or almost a year ago at the DAA conference, and it just my association with you, you have done so much in my life already, by giving me a platform to use to talk and, trying to get the word out with, Dementia Friendly Southern Nevada. And it's odd that you said that one thing when they said you were too slow because you were working more on patient-centered care. And how many people are doing that now? You were just ahead of your time.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I credit my mom for it. She was the most amazing care partner. And I was so fortunate for my mother's influence on me, not just personally as her daughter, but also professionally, because she was operating from a place of person and relationship centered care before we had any words to describe that approach. And I could see, I would watch my mom work with elders, and I would see the way that the elders would respond to my mom in ways that I didn't see them responding to other folks who worked at the nursing home. And it gave me a front row seat to good practice. And so I'm really grateful to my mother. She taught me so much, and just through her beautiful example.
Now I know, how did your outlook change? Because I know that, dementia is part of your life now with your father. How does that change kind of your perception when, you can work with a lot of people, but when it's somebody that's in your heart, it's your mother, your father, or something like this. How did that change you and you kind of your perception of going through dementia?
That's such a good question. And it has been a really interesting evolution for me professionally. So for 30 years of my career, I supported people living with dementia professionally, but never had an experience as a family care partner. And just as of the last 2 years, that has changed. My dad, one of my dads, I have two, actually I have three if we count my father-in-law, but I'm fortunate I've got lots of dads. And one of my dads is living with vascular dementia and Alzheimer's disease. He's living very well, I'm happy to say. And he lives at home alone. We lost my mom in 2016. And so my dad lives in their house, and he has a network of family support and some professional care partners as well. And we really support my dad in living at home, the life he chooses on his terms. And I will say that being a family care partner now, it has taken everything that I've taught over the years, all of my professional values and approaches, and has put it all to the test. And so, Chuck, that for a very long time, I've been a very strong advocate for supporting the rights of people who are living with dementia. And that just because you're diagnosed with dementia doesn't mean that your rights should be stripped from you. And that people who are living with dementia have the right to make decisions for themselves. That people living with dementia have the right to live in inclusive communities without the restraint of locked doors. I really believe that people who are living with dementia have the right to assert their autonomy and self-determination to the fullest extent possible. And so I've been teaching about these rights for years as a professional. I've been advocating for the rights of people living with dementia nationally and internationally. And now all of a sudden my dad's living with dementia. And as a family care partner, I get to experience the discomfort that comes with supporting the rights of people living with dementia when it's someone that you love. And yeah, there are times where, I, as a family member, have had to grapple with my dad's right to live life on his own terms. And yeah, there's risk involved. And as a family, we try our best to negotiate that risk through having really great communication including our dad in absolutely every single one of those communications. But yeah, it's hard. I know I now am well familiar with the anxiety that sometimes comes when you're supporting a person's right to live a life that has risk involved in it. And there's absolutely risk involved in my dad's life. And we're willing to accept those risks as a family, and my dad's willing to accept those risks. But it has been a wonderful opportunity for self-reflection for me professionally, to make sure that these values and approaches that I'm teaching to folks, out in the field, are actually approaches and values that I can practice in my personal life.
I'm so glad you talked about, so a person's autonomy, because I think communication is everything when you have, issues, and, we know that we have issues when we have dementia. But I think I always advocate that you have to be honest and truthful with your family and allow them to help you. And I think it's so great that you include your father in all of the, the communications and things, and letting him know that you're trying to help him. And when things get a little bit farther, it's easier to have those conversations with him because he's used to it. I hate to see when, loving families, when they do the wrong things for the right reasons. And it's hard to try to step in and says, you have to let this happen, or you have to allow them to do this. Because when you start closing somebody off, and as an instructor and an educator, you start closing people off, that's the worst thing you can do for this disease. And by including him and making him feel important, he knows that you love him, and he honestly knows that everything you do for him is out of love. And when it comes time for him to transition to another place, that is going to make it so much easier to talk to him about, because he already trusts you and he knows that you're coming from a loving position. If you were talking with a family, and especially, with dealing with the different cultures and the religions and things with everybody that has dementia, how do you talk to them about having almost the ideal setup that you have with your father, about making them included with all the decisions?
How do I talk to, I just make sure I have your question right, Chuck. How do I talk to other people about engaging people in decisions? It's interesting because you're right. I mean, there is, I think that, each of us has different values. And some of those values are cultural. Some of them are religious or spiritual values that some folks might hold. Some people believe that they're doing the best thing by taking decision making over for a person. Some of us might call that paternalistic. Some people just call it, they're loving. But I think what is important is to recognize, I honestly have worked with elders who historically across their life have deferred decision making to other people, and that was prior to dementia. Some folks, just for example, let's say there's a couple, and let's say that one of the partners has always deferred to the decision making of his or her spouse. And so in situations like this, all of a sudden, encouraging someone to be self-determined and autonomous in their own decision making, it might not be a good fit for that particular individual if they have always deferred decision making to somebody else. But for most folks that I've worked with, they really want to continue to stay engaged in all of the decisions that affect their lives, the big ones and the little ones. And people experience tremendous distress and mistrust when they feel like their family members are cutting them out of decision making. So it is, for my family, it was really easy. We were all committed to keeping our dad engaged in all of the decisions that affect his life. And so he, you know, he knows that we're committed to that. But I have to be honest, that every once in a while, my dad will forget that we did include him in decision making about something. So I get to see firsthand what it is like for my dad when he thinks that he's been cut out of a decision. And it's really, really difficult. And I can see the pain that that causes him. And it's difficult for me because I know that we did include him in that decision. And I wish that he could remember it always. But there are times where he does not understand, he doesn't remember, and he'll be very offended and very hurt and say, I can't believe you kids are just making these decisions without my input. And that's really hard. And so I get to see firsthand what it must be like for so many people who are living with dementia, whose family members, with the best of intentions, lovingly but mistakenly cut them out of decision making. It's painful. It erodes personhood, and it actually can really damage relationships. So so we really, you know, I don't, how to encourage people to do that. I guess a good thing to do would just be to ask people to try to put themselves in the shoes of a person who's living with dementia, which, by the way, I don't recommend too often. I don't think you can truly understand dementia unless you're living with dementia. But what I want people to think about is what it must feel like to have your decisions stripped from you. I think on some scale, all of us can relate with how horrible that would be. You know, they have all of these dementia simulation activities. I'm sure you've heard of them. And they'll put on the goggles and smear them with Vaseline, maybe put ball bearings in your shoe, and put gloves on. But really, if you want to simulate the experience of living with dementia, the experience that causes the most suffering, if you ask people living with dementia what causes the most suffering, most folks will say it's the social response of dementia. It's not the cognitive changes that cause the most suffering. It's when people feel ignored, when they feel excluded, when they're cut off from the ability to exercise their own self-determination. That's what causes suffering. That is what causes the most suffering. And so if people want to support people who are living with dementia, we have to continue to respect and honor each adult living with dementia as an active citizen and as a decision maker to the fullest extent possible.
Glad you brought that up about the person, maybe they haven't made the decisions. Maybe I worded that wrong, but I think through the communication, if you keep them in the loop and talk to them about, well, we're going to do these, and not, you know, just exclude them totally. Because if they're used to not making decisions, they'll appreciate you making it. But you're also keeping them involved in it so they do understand. And you're right, you know, you do run into snags sometimes with, as this disease progresses some, of forgetting the conversation. But I think if you've always had that communication with them, it makes it a lot easier to get over the rough spots. And the rough spots, everybody's going to have them because of the prognosis of this disease. Nobody's going to be immune from it. With what you teach, why do you think there's so many stigmas and things that we have to overcome? And even with all the care people that are out there now that are preaching the one-on-one, basically, if you look at most of them, it's just being kind to somebody, you know, when talking to them, not at them. Why do you think it's so difficult for people to understand that very, very small difference in caring for somebody?
Yeah, it's a big question. you ask these big questions, Chuck. When I think about the stigma of dementia, and all of the misunderstandings that it perpetuates, I do like to think about who's responsible for this stigma and these misunderstandings. And to a certain extent, I feel like there's kind of two big culprits. Number one is the media and the way that people who are living with dementia are portrayed in the media as feeble, as depressed, as, you know, shells of their former selves. You've seen all of this in the media. It must drive you absolutely crazy. And so the media is perpetuating a certain stereotype of dementia that is completely misinformed. And what's really sad, and Christine Bryden actually talks about this in some of her advocacy. Christine Bryden, the amazing self-advocate in the UK, Christine Bryden talks about how a lot of organizations that actually exist to support the needs of people living with dementia, unfortunately, are also perpetuating this stereotype of dementia in order to raise funds to support their work. And so we do have to look at media, including fundraising campaigns, and the way that people who are living with dementia are portrayed, and the stereotypes of these helpless images. And we need to push back on that, because that's one of the reasons why people are very quick to take over the decisions for people living with dementia, is because they are taught by the media that people living with dementia can't make their own decisions, and that they can't be contributors, and that, you know, in order to help them, we have to just, you know, basically take over for them. Kate Swaffer talks about prescribed disengagement, the term that she coined to describe her experience as a person living with dementia, and how healthcare professionals, you know, when she was diagnosed, basically encouraged her to get her life in order and appoint a substitute decision maker. And so in part, I think that there are unfortunately these stereotypes that are perpetuated about people living with dementia. And then the other challenge, I think, is the biomedical paradigm of dementia. And so when these two forces come together, it's like a double whammy that really restricts the opportunities available for people living with dementia. And so healthcare providers are taught that they are the experts in the experience of living with dementia, not the person living with dementia, and that it should be that they should be advising what a person living with dementia should and should not do. And so some healthcare providers take it a little far, and you'll see this when you know, when they're in an office with a person living with dementia and that person's family members, and they talk to the family member instead of to the person living with dementia. Well, why? Where is this? Because they're basically saying, I'm the expert and I'm going to share my opinion with the person who in this room I understand to be kind of the next person in this hierarchy of decision making. And it's the family member, not the person living with dementia. And that's wrong. And that's absolutely wrong. And we all have a responsibility when we see that happen of redirecting the healthcare worker.
That was beautiful. One thing I want to just say is our future is in great hands with people like you. I guess the only words I come up with is you get it, you know, about what happens with this disease, because it's so slow and progressing that when a person first gets it, there's a lot to deal with, and maybe they can't make really good decisions right then. But, you know, once they get kind of past that decision part, you know, most of us, our senses come back, our common sense comes back, and it is because of people like you, you know, that are out there in the front lines trying to educate the people that take care of us and the doctors. because my experience with my diagnosis is exactly what you said with Kate. I walked in, he goes, you need to get your affairs in order. You have early onset Alzheimer's disease. I'll see you in 6 months. And that was it. And you kind of left on your own. I do have one last question for you. And I asked this to everybody. If this was the first video that either somebody with dementia is watching or a care partner for somebody who is just diagnosed, what would you say to them?
Not to believe the stereotypes of dementia, that you can live well with dementia. You can live well. I'm not saying that there aren't going to be challenges. My dad certainly has challenges. We as a family have challenges, but everybody in life has challenges. And so, yeah, there's going to be struggles ahead, but there's also going to be a lot of living. And you can live well with dementia. And what's important is that you get yourself plugged into some positive supports. Surround yourself with people who believe in the possibility that you can live well with dementia, because those folks are going to help open up spaces for wonderful things to happen. Create your own spaces for those wonderful things to happen. But just don't buy the stereotype. Now, I'm not saying again that there's not struggles, but there aren't going to be challenges. There are going to be challenges, and it's going to be really hard. But a lot of folks I know who have been diagnosed with dementia, they've been living with it for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years. And so if you're going to live with something like a chronic condition, you can decide if do you want to live those 10 years succumbing to, the tragedy of dementia, if we can call it that. And yeah, it's tragic. Nobody wants to be diagnosed with dementia, but who can live for 10 years under the weight that it's only a tragedy? Who can live for 15 years under the weight that it's only a tragedy? If you've been diagnosed with dementia, you've got a whole lot of living to do, and you can live well. You absolutely can live well. And so get busy supporting your own well-being and surround yourself with people who also will support your well-being.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time to talk to us. It was a dream talking with you. You're one of my heroes. And you have changed my life down here in Nevada, being able to talk with people, to work with people who are all we're traveling down the same highway. And it's such a pleasure to have you on. Thank you very much.
Chuck, thanks for all of your advocacy. You're helping change that stereotype of dementia through shows like This Dementia Life. You're changing what people understand about dementia. Thank you for being my friend and my partner and my teacher. And just keep it up. Keep doing it. And I hope people just spread the word. There's a new dementia. There's a new dementia. We don't have to, it's not the dementia of 30 years ago. We understand much more. People can live well with dementia. And anyway, I'm grateful to be your partner, Chuck, and thanks for everything that you're doing across the globe in being a voice of advocacy.
Thank you so very much. I'd like to thank the Dementia Action Alliance for their support on behalf of This Dementia Life. And thank you for joining us today. You can view other podcasts on our website, daanow.org, and click on podcasts. Please join me again to meet the most inspiring and amazing people on This Dementia Life. I'm your host, Chuck McClatchy, and remember, the brain may forget, but the heart remembers. See you next time on This Dementia Life.